Hello, welcome to the Enlightened Times podcast. I've got a very special guest tonight on the show, and his name's Kieran Woodhouse.
Hey, Mark.
You all right, Kieran?
Yeah, doing well. You?
Yeah. Just to sort of introduce you, Kieran, you're a paranormal investigator, you're a researcher, you're also an author of two books, and you're a podcaster.
I am. Yeah. It's sounds like a lot, really, doesn't it? I The podcast is on a bit of a hiatus at the moment, actually.
Right.
Having a kid, and he was going to bed at the time I used to do the interviews like we're doing now. So
Yep.
it just got a bit too much, really. But it'll come back. I think it will come back. But yeah. It's again the investigating, not doing as much as I would really like to. But I've been spending a lot of time doing the private stuff, doing
Yeah.
the private houses and stuff. I find that I enjoy them more than going on these big public events now, for
Yes.
for
Yeah.
for, for various reasons that we might get into
Yeah.
dur-
Yeah. Yeah. I think you
during the
mentioned something
interview.
like that. Yeah, in your presentation, which I've videoed recently. So yeah, so just to kick off, I mean, just a little bit about yourself. I mean, because I know just to you know do this, in advance. You used to play in a band. You was a drummer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh God, yeah,
man
yeah.
of many talents.
Wow, you haven't heard me. I think so. To go from the start. So I grew up in a haunted house.
Right.
And then lots of things used to happen. I mean, just a few stories. My mum would have these ornaments, these vases, and she'd place them. There were a set of three. You had a
Yeah.
big, medium, and small, and she'd have them like that on the fireplace, big, medium, and small. And her nan, when she was alive, would always argue with her about how she decorated the room and it wasn't quite right, and she should have these vases in a different place. And regularly we would go out and come back, and the vases would be exactly how my mum's nan would like them. So she would have moved after she died. So she would have moved them around somehow. And I remember my mum shouting, at this invisible thing. I didn't understand why. Normally she would be shouting at me, but she was shouting at this invisible thing, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand. And then we moved house into another house. I mean, you talk about synchronicity, and the house that we moved into was my dad called his dad, so my granddad, and said, "We've moved house. You should come and have a look at this house." So he said, "All right, where is it?" So told him where it was and all that. He said, "Okay, what number?" So my dad told him the number, and my granddad said, "I was born in that house." So there was this like weird
Yeah.
synchronicity going on there. So yeah, so now my mum and dad live in the house that my granddad and his family were used to live in, and that's haunted again, by, we think, my dad's auntie, so my granddad's sister. Many a time you've seen items shuffling across the table on their own, candle holders and things like
Wow.
that, just moving across the table. Um, so I I kind of grew up surrounded by the paranormal, and that triggered my interest. And then I used to watch programs such as Strange but True, and
Oh
think
yeah.
things like, scare myself witless before I went to bed, and then lie under the covers, not wanting to go to sleep. Um, and then life gets in the way, doesn't it? So I you kind of leave school, you get a job, and as you said, I was in a band. You
Yep.
know, semi-successful, I suppose you could say we were. Um, Used to what else do college, work in a band, all this kind of stuff going on. You get a girlfriend or whatever, and then you kind of lose interest in these things. And then I had my brother and I had a really up close UFO encounter,
Right.
which was over. Have I ever told you about this?
Think you may have done. Think you
Yeah,
may have done. Yeah.
this
But
was
the
over.
listeners would love this. So yeah.
So this was over Romsley. We were coming back from Bromsgrove. My brother and I, we'd been
Right.
rugby training,
Yeah.
and we were just coming up. If you're familiar, coming back from Bromsgrove to Halesowen, we
Yeah.
we we chose to go through the country lanes up through Romsley, and of course, as you get to the top, you can see for miles. You can see into Birmingham.
Yeah.
And anyway, as we started up this country lane, the motorway, the M5, runs parallel, and it's there. You can hear the traffic, you see the lights, so you're kind of familiar with it. But this one light just didn't go away, and it seemed to follow us as we kind of veered away from the motorway.
Right.
And then I said as we got to the nearer the top, it kind of clears. As I say, you can see for miles. And out of this tree line came this craft, and it was triangular. At the time, I thought it was rectangular. It had lights, one on each back corner, nothing in the middle, nothing at the front, and it was just cruising really slowly. And it was about 1,000 feet up, about 1,000 feet away. And my brother and I were just sat in the car. It's quite a busy road, but thinking back on it, no cars came past. There was some pubs, there's houses, all this, but nothing was happening. It's really weird. And I'm just kind of stopped in the middle of the road. So I pull over, turn my engine off. So now you can't hear anything. And literally you can't hear anything. This thing is right there. You can hear a plane at 20,000 feet
Yeah.
or whatever, but you just couldn't hear this thing. And that was probably the scariest aspect of it, just the silence. And if I'd have carried on driving at 30 miles an hour, I'd have left it well behind because it was going that slow. But eventually it kind of disappeared into the next tree line, and we lost it. But it was about 5 minutes. And during that time, we both started crying. Like loads, like big babies. And we couldn't explain why. We didn't understand why we were crying. And then as we got back into House Owen and we got back living with our mum and dad, we
Yeah.
told my mum and dad. And I think if I would have told them and it was just me, they maybe would have thought the boy who cried wolf.
Yeah.
But my brother's not really into this kind of thing. And so the fact he experienced it too is quite, it kind of helped back up my story. I think it made it more believable to my mum and dad. But it's weird because we don't talk about it. We went to bed that night. We shared a bedroom. I think we maybe spoke about it for a couple of seconds, and that was it. We didn't speak about it again. But from then, my kind of my life has been a huge, massive synchronicities
Mhm.
since then, and I don't know if that was the moment that spurred it. I don't know if that moment has kind of created this. But then it wasn't long after that my wife brought me a ticket to a ghost hunt at Dudley Zoo or something.
Yeah.
And, so we went along and then I just got hooked. I used to watch things like Most Haunted and all that rubbish.
Yeah.
But I just got hooked on going. So I used to go to all these different events and then eventually got in with a team and started investigating with a team and then, going off and doing my own thing as well. And that's really how I got into it. But my opinions on the paranormal have changed a lot over my kind of time doing this. They're always evolving.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's one of the things, I noticed when you done your presentation, you touched on that, didn't you? How your view of the paranormal had shifted. You can get into some of that because I thought it was quite interesting how how you referenced the term ghosts, and when we see a ghost, what is actually going on there, and how you sort of broke it down into how they come into our frequency range or spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, my interest before I got into the ghosts, I did begin to look into the nature of reality
Yeah.
and things like that. And I always used to think that there's got to be. I've never believed in God, and there'll be people watching this who think I've had people kind of criticize me because I'm a ghost hunter, but I don't believe in God. Apparently, you can't. You've got to be both. You've got to, if you're a ghost hunter, you've got to believe in God. But I don't. I don't believe in God in the sense of, organized religion.
Yeah.
Do I believe in a higher power? I think we are the higher power. I think we have it in ourselves to be that thing. So the more I looked at the nature of reality, the more interesting it got, and the deeper I went into the rabbit hole. And then when I began to look at the paranormal, I started to put the two together. I started to bring the nature of reality research into the paranormal research, and not the first person to do this, of course. You've got people like John Keel who's done this rather successfully. And in fact, it's one of those where I don't really know a lot of a research. I don't people say, do you know this guy? Do you know that guy? And not really. I don't watch the programs. I don't follow that. I just do my own thing. I keep my
Yes.
head down and do my own research. And then every now and then I come across something and I think, oh, he has the same opinions as me, or
Yeah.
she's come to the same conclusion that I've come to.
Yeah.
So it's always nice when you see that, but I don't kind of really research a lot of people to get those theories from. So yeah, I mean, when I started to combine the two lots of research, it opened up so many possibilities as to what we were dealing with. Because
Yeah.
the one thing I quickly noticed was that the paranormal, well, the ghost hunting. I hate that term, but the ghost hunting field,
Mhm.
um, they were so kind of archaic in what they were doing. They were using the same equipment that they'd used for years. They were asking the same questions. They were of the opinion that ghosts were just dead people. They were always just dead people. There was no other possibility as to what they could be. Um, and I blame a lot of it on the TV shows, because
Yeah.
that's kind of who they look up to. So if Yvette Fielding is using a particular piece of equipment, then they go and buy that piece of equipment.
Yeah.
Most of them don't even know what that equipment does. They just see it on telly, so they buy it themselves.
Yeah.
And that was the reason I wrote my first book, because I was getting really annoyed
Right.
with people, the most haunted effect, as I've called it, who were
Yeah. Yeah.
expecting, they were expecting these kind of things, these possessions to happen within the first 10 minutes, things to be flying off the shelf within the first 5 minutes. And
Yeah.
that's not what ghost hunting's about. Ghost hunting is trying not to fall asleep. Ghost hunting is, listening to your belly grumble because you're hungry at 1:30 in the morning, or your mate snoring on your
Right.
shoulder. That's ghost hunting. And, once every 10 or 15 investigations, you might find something maybe that could be a ghost.
Yeah.
So I got really annoyed with it. So I decided to pen the first book and really try and tell people what ghost hunting was about, what the equipment was we used, why it was used, whether it should be used, my
Yeah.
opinions on that. And I go right the way back to the old school of scrying and spirit boards,
Yeah.
right the way up to the modern day stuff like thermal imaging cameras and
Yeah.
ultraviolet torches and stuff like that. So each chapter was on a different piece of equipment with some
Right.
stories sprinkled in. Um, so yeah, so when I started to pose questions to these groups, maybe ghosts aren't just dead people,
Yeah.
or maybe there's more to it.
Yeah.
Um, they couldn't get it. Their mind would kind of go, "What? Well, of course they're dead people." I used to sit with these. For any of the listeners that have been on ghost hunts, they'll know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
I used to sit around a spirit board and listen to the same questions. Are you a man? Are you a woman?
Yeah.
Did you die here? Um, do you mean us harm? Because of course he's always got to come back to that kind of horror movie mentality of whatever it is, it's a demon and it's out to harm us.
Yeah.
But I always used to, I'd say, so what is he? And they'd say, oh, it looks like we're talking to a monk from the 1100s. And I'd say, right, and he can talk perfect English, can he? And they'd say, what do you mean? I'd say, well, he's answering you in perfect English. Would that monk not have spoken in Latin
Yeah.
or French or something? He wouldn't have spoken in English. Now you're talking to a 4-year-old boy from the 1600s who can articulate better than I can. The 40-year-old men from the 1600s couldn't even spell their own name, let alone articulate as well as this thing was. So I was trying to explain to them that if this was the spirit of a 4-year-old boy from the 1600s, he wouldn't be able to be spelling as well as he's spelling now on that board. So
Yeah.
there had to be more at play. There had to be something else going on
Right.
that enabled these spirits to communicate in that way. But whenever I brought it up, I mean, I actually got kicked out of a ghost hunt once because I dared to question God. So some spoke to someone this
Yeah.
thing on the board, and I said, "Have you met God?" And someone said, "You can't ask that." And I said, "Well, why?" I said, "With all due respect, I don't care if it's a man or a woman. I don't care how it died. I certainly don't care if it's here to harm us. The only thing I want to know is things, like that we can't see. Where is this person?
Yeah.
What plane of existence is he on? What can he
Yeah.
see around him? How is he interacting with us? Has he met God?" These are the questions that we should be asking. in order to further our research.
Yeah.
And that they just didn't take it very well at all, and asked me to leave the table, and then I just left. So yeah, it's kind of combining those two areas of research for me just opened up so many pathways.
Right, right. So what you met there then was quite a lot of resistance then to explore certain areas. Perhaps they
Yeah,
were fixed on or rigid, you know.
the, the problem is that it's not the first time I've met resistance, because, as you know, I'm what you would call a conspiracy theorist, or a conspiracy realist. So
Alternative knowledge.
yeah. Oh, is that what it's called? Okay.
Yeah,
We went on a ghost. We went. You know, my friend Ryan, and we went on
yeah,
a ghost hunt between the two lockdowns, and it was all, you've got to wear your mask, you've got to do this, you've got
yeah,
to do that. But of course, we didn't. And then, so when we got there, they were talking. Oh, they were bad mouthing some other paranormal researcher. I don't know who he was,
yeah.
because he dared to question the COVID narrative.
Right.
And so both Ryan and I piped up and said, "Oh, well, he sounds like he's making a lot of sense if you ask us."
Yeah,
And she said, "What do you mean he's making a lot of sense?" I said, "Well, he sounds like he's making a lot of sense. He knows what he's talking about."
yeah.
And she said, "Oh, you're not into all this, are you?" So we said, "Well, you're the one wearing a mask. We're not." And bearing in mind the
Right.
investigation was
Yeah,
outside, the majority of
yeah,
the investigation was outside. And she said, "Oh, you two, you're going to have to investigate on your own." And I was like, "Is that a bad thing?" Like, I'd prefer to
yeah,
investigate on our own, you know.
yeah,
But it's like you can't be a paranormal researcher and think outside the box
yeah,
in any way possible. And I mean, like, even as far as UFOs. I mean,
yeah,
so you find that a lot of, again, that term, but a lot of ghost hunters don't really follow ufology, and a lot of ufologists don't really delve into the ghost world, and
yeah,
they don't really crisscross. So the second that I start to tell them, well, did you know that it's possible that UFOs and aliens are actually on the same plane of existence as what you would call a ghost? And
yes,
they go, what is
yeah,
what?
yeah,
And I say, and did you know that they're closely related to the Bigfoot? And I think that they're all connected. Are you saying Bigfoot's a ghost? And I'm like, no, I'm not
yeah,
saying Bigfoot's a ghost.
yeah.
But they just can't comprehend it. And
Right.
so I think trying to break them out of that mold is incredibly difficult. And
Yeah,
that's partly where I've completely fell out of love with, as I mentioned, going on these big events and dealing with
yeah,
all these people. I can't do it anymore, like, because it's just the energy and the I guess just the energy that you spend and you consume trying to tell these people or
yeah,
explain, but then again, I do respect their opinions and their beliefs, and it is what it is. But
yeah,
I'm in it to progress my knowledge and to try and understand a little bit further down the path.
yeah,
If they're happy going out every Saturday night with the same pieces of equipment, asking the same questions at the same location, and getting the same results, then fine. That's obviously what they're happy to do. But for me, that's not what I'm about. I want to push it a little bit more.
right. Now, no, I totally get that, what you're saying, because it is difficult. It's almost like you're stuck in a mainstream, isn't it, in that ghost hunting sort of
Yeah,
situation, whereas you're trying to push them boundaries to go beyond and get your understanding and obviously more knowledge and further that wider, I guess. But I guess if you're met with closed minds, it's very difficult
it is.
to
Yeah,
expand closed minds.
yeah. Well, I mean, I try to explain to them that my theories on how these things are existing outside of our perceptive range. So,
Yeah, yeah,
as I mentioned in that presentation the other night, we can see what we call visible light is
yes,
0.0035% of the light
yeah,
spectrum. So
yeah,
there's basically nigh on 100% of the world around us that we cannot perceive or interact with because it's outside of our perceptive range. So, you know, there are realms upon realms of existence around us now that we just can't see or sense or feel.
yeah,
So what's existing in those realms, in those worlds, that could be so much stuff existing there, and we're trapped within this band of frequency because we're trapped within this biological vessel, with this 5 sense reality,
Yes.
and our consciousness or soul or spirit or whatever is just energy. And when we die, this energy can leave, and it can then kind of vibrate on any particular frequency it wants to, and it's not trapped within this point of attention that we are now.
Yeah.
So I genuinely believe that that's what's happening. That's where these things like Bigfoots and UFOs, they're all operating on these different frequency ranges.
Yeah.
And we did a really good experiment. It was a place in Derby. And I could never remember the name of the place. It's like an oldie worldy manor estate house, but it was on the side of like a modern day like conservative club with like a bowling green and a function room. It was a really weird place. And we did a bit of an experiment where we were in the room and we had some EMF emitters. So we started to pump out loads of different frequency ranges. So the kind of thing where you pump out, your frequencies, and then you can tune your walkie-talkie onto one and operate on that frequency. But we were essentially flooding this room with all of these different frequency ranges. But kind of between a low band and a high band.
Yeah.
And while we were in there, we were just doing a bit of a seance. We were doing a bit of a walk around. It was just like your average size living room space. And there were wooden floorboards, so we were very cautious to stand still while we were doing what we were doing. And then nothing happened. We were in there for about 15, 20 minutes, and absolutely nothing happened. So what we did was we turned off these emitters. So we've kind of emptied the room of this range of EMF, and then as soon as we've turned them off, we started to get activity. Our
Yeah.
we use what's called a REM pod,
Yeah.
and it's kind of like an old school. What is that Victorian instrument? Is it a theremin? Where you go close to it and it goes like
Oh, right. Yes.
that kind of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it emits a frequency, and then as something comes into that range, it makes a noise. So that started to go off like
Yeah.
something was walking around it. We started to hear footsteps on the wooden floorboards. They started to creak. A lot of activity. And I think what we'd done is we'd blocked them being able to come in
Right.
because we'd restricted, we'd flooded it with all these kind of frequencies, and they couldn't get in on the frequencies that they operate on. So what happened is, you're at a party, you go to a kitchen, you want to get in, but there's a lot of people in there, so you think I'll come
Yeah.
back later. And I think it was like that. I think they were trying to get in, but they were like, oh no, it's a bit full. I'll come back
Mhm.
later. So as soon as we kind of emptied it all, they then came in, and we had a lot of activity. And it's when you get evidence like that, you think, right, I'm on the right path.
Yeah.
And the other story that I tell often is, I think this one's in the book, but we were in a place called Drakelow Tunnels.
Oh, right. Yeah.
An old, yeah, really a fantastic place. They don't do ghost hunts anymore. But we were down there, and I just had a really weird experience. This is literally like the first chapter of the book. I had a really weird experience, and I had to be pulled out of that environment. And I got took to a room next door. So a guy took me into the room next door, and the rest of the group stayed in the room that I was in. And while we were in this other room, this guy is kind of looking at me, saying, "Just look at me, focus, relax, try and calm down." And while we were kind of having this one to one, we heard this really guttural, evil, animalistic growl behind me. And I'm not even going to try and do it. It was a horrible, horrible growl. So I've kind of spun round to look, and he said, "Don't just ignore it, just look at me." After about 5 minutes, I felt a little bit better, and we decided to go back into that room. And they'd carried on recording with an EVP, so they were recording their electronic, like the voices basically,
Yeah.
like a modern dictaphone. So they were recording, calling out, asking it to make noise, and they caught a voice saying hello, a very innocent, sweet hello. And we ran the timings, and it was the time that we heard the growl was the time that they had picked up hello.
Right.
Now, the way I see this is with our the ears that we have, within this very small band
Mm.
of perception, we heard this guttural growl. But actually, what it was saying was hello, and on a recorder that can pick up higher or lower,
Yeah.
frequencies than we can hear, it's picked it up how it should have been heard, which was it was just saying hello.
Yeah.
So, how many times do people say, I heard a growl, I heard something really evil? But it's just that it's trying to communicate with you, but it's kind of on a different wavelength, so you can't quite pick it up.
Yeah.
And actually, if you could tune into it, it's probably saying something like, I don't know, you look nice today or something.
Yeah.
But we just perceive it as this growl. And if you think now how I talk to you, um, all that's happening is my vocal cords are vibrating,
Yeah.
and I am effectively growling at you. I am literally barking at you, just weird noises. But your mind has been programmed to receive those sound waves and decode them into words.
Yeah.
It makes sense to you. And if I started to talk in Spanish, I would assume you wouldn't know what I was talking about because your brain hasn't been manipulated in that way. And
Yeah.
I think that's, again, it's what's happening here.
Yeah.
We're hearing these noises, these growls, but we're not decoding them. Our brain isn't programmed to decode them on that particular frequency. So again, when you get evidence like that, it kind of makes you think, right, I'm on the right path here.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
helps back it up.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really interesting how you touch on that, especially around sound and vibration, and how we interpret. How we've been conditioned, obviously, with English language. Like you say, if somebody's talking different language, we don't. It just sounds, isn't it? At the end of the
Yeah.
day. So that's an interesting, perspective you've got on that. I think it's a really valid one because that does resonate for me. Like I was seeing at your presentation, a lot of what you were talking about resonated and made sense.
Yeah.
Like you say, you don't really hear a lot of, I call it mainstream ghost hunts and
No.
paranormal. They don't seem to go down that path. What you're sort of
People do though,
exploring.
people do, Mark, and it would be completely remiss of me to say that I've completely orchestrated this,
Yeah, yeah,
this
yeah,
way of thinking. Um, People do have these same opinions and they do this same kind of research, but
yeah,
they are few and far between,
yeah,
and it is very difficult for them to get into the limelight because it's not the accepted agenda at the minute.
yeah.
I don't think there's really an agenda behind ghost hunting as much as you might have behind UFOs with the whole disclosure and the
Yes.
government cover up and stuff like that. But
Yeah.
um, but there is still some kind of agenda,
Mm.
and I think the main agenda at the minute is entertainment shows, the TV shows. They all sell, and if they started to get a bit too sciencey and a bit too complicated and a bit too complex, people wouldn't tune in. People pay their money to go on these ghost hunts because they want to get in touch with their dead mum or their dead nan. So
Yeah.
this kind of theory of spirits being dead people, that has to keep being pushed because I think there's so much invested in that theory at the minute. But I'll keep going, and as I mentioned in that presentation, I'm always open to new possibilities. Every time I give one of those talks, or if I do one of these shows, I always get a
Yeah.
comment or someone comes up and talks to me, and I always get something said to me that makes me think, oh, okay, something that makes me rethink where I was going,
Yeah.
because they'll say, oh, you've mentioned this, but that doesn't explain this, and I'll go, no, it doesn't. I need to go away and think about that, and
Mm.
then I'll think about it and I'll ponder it. Whereas what you get is that you get a lot of people who they 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 change the evidence to fit their theories,
Yeah.
whereas you should be changing your theories to fit the evidence.
Yes.
Um, because what happens if you operate in their way, then it means you're potentially neglecting some groundbreaking evidence simply because it doesn't fit your theory. And it's possible that there are a lot of theories that are right. They could all be it could all be right at the same time. It could be dead people, it could be consciousness, it could be interdimensional, it could be all of these things in one way or another playing a part. But people really they kind of pick a I don't know, there is a saying, but I can't remember what it is. But they kind of pick their ground and they stand on it, and
Yeah.
they're not open to any other interpretation of what it could possibly be. And I did talk about this in the presentation, but for me, and this upsets a lot of people because there's a lot of people who are invested in some of these people, you know, and I mentioned the likes of people like Nick Pope, who changes his opinion like the wind, you know, but you know these kind of big paranormal researchers or these big conspiracy, you know, podcast hosts and all these people,
Yeah.
what happens is they people attach themselves to these, I don't know what you'd call them, but they almost like hero worship them.
Oh yeah.
And then that person can't say anything wrong or do anything wrong. You know, like
Mm.
I'm a big U2 fan. Now
Yeah.
Bono is an absolute dickhead. And I'm not afraid to admit that, you know, but a lot of U2 fans, you can't say a bad word about Bono, but no, he's an idiot. And to be honest, they've made some of the best music in the world, and they've made some god awful music, you know, and I can admit that. But what happens is you get these people who attach themselves to these celebrities or whatever they are,
Yeah.
and it doesn't matter what they say, these people will kind of follow it, you know. Oh,
Yeah.
but he said this, and well, yeah, but you know, if someone you didn't like said that, you'd be all over that. You'd be saying, "Oh yeah, a load of rubbish." But because it's someone you like that said it, then you think it's the best thing in the world, and it's gospel, and it's true. So for me, it's always about the evidence. You know, someone I don't like, if they make a good song, if someone I don't like makes a good point, if they
Mm.
have a good debate and they make some,
Yeah.
Katie Hopkins, for example, I think she's a bit of an idiot, but some of the things she says, I can't help but agree with. I agree with what she
Yeah.
says.
Yeah.
Doesn't mean I agree with all of it, but I agree with some of it. But some
Yeah.
people, you either love her or you hate her. They agree with everything that she says, or they disagree with everything she says. Even if she raises points that they might agree with, they
Yeah.
can't bring themselves to admit, oh well, she's made a good point.
Yeah.
And that
Yeah.
happens in this type of field as well. You know, the conspiracies, the paranormal, the ufology.
Yeah.
And these people are, you know, they stake their claim, they have a theory, they do years and years of research, they write dozens and dozens of books, they tour the world doing their, you know, their presentations, their conferences, they go to these all-day events where there's like multiple speakers on, and they do their bit. They meet the fans, they have the photos took, they have a talking head on an Ancient Aliens program or whatever.
Yeah.
And you think, you know, that's given them their 15 minutes of fame. It's probably given them a pretty good bloody living.
Yeah. Yeah.
So they cannot back down on their theory now.
Yeah.
They've got too much invested in it. And so it's this. I called it in the presentation. I called it relevance because that's what it is. That they're worried about their relevance.
Yeah.
So they will now hammer that theory home. It doesn't matter how much the evidence changes, how
Mhm.
much the landscape changes. That means they're a bit outdated now, or you know things have moved on and their theories are a bit backdated. They don't care. They will hammer it and hammer it and hammer it because the second they change their mind, or the second they're proven to not be correct anymore, potentially, they're
Yeah.
not relevant and they
Yes.
lose. Then they're not flavour of the month, and they're not invited onto the TV shows, and their books don't sell, and they don't get invited onto the podcast shows and all that stuff. So they they have to fight tough and nail to keep their theory relevant.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
what that then does is it drives them to try and discredit and have a go at other people who have opposing theories. You
Yeah.
know, so don't go and listen to him because he's talking rubbish. Only listen to what I'm saying because you know I'm the expert and I know what's going on.
Yeah.
Don't go and listen to them because if you listen to them, you might begin to believe them, and if you believe them, then you don't believe me, and I lose my fan base or whatever.
Yeah.
Whereas really what they should be doing is joining up with that other person and saying, well, what's your theories?
Yes.
Okay, right. Well, my theories are this. Okay. Well, there's some similarities there. You know, there's some crossover there. So maybe if we did a bit of research together, we could put two pieces of the puzzle together and be one step closer.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure there's an agenda to it, but it certainly feels like this divisiveness within the ufology field. You know, you have your interdimensional believers, your nuts and bolts craft type believers, your interplanetary believers. They're always kept apart at a distance. You know, like this politics, this infighting, and
Yeah.
it's almost like it's done on purpose, because the second that they actually all come together
Yeah.
and realize that they all hold a different piece of the same puzzle, they could get to the answer a lot better, a lot quicker,
Mm.
and solve the mystery. But they're kept apart, you know, they're kept fighting. And that happens within the paranormal world as well. And it's that kind of thing that I just cannot be bothered with.
No, no, I know what you mean. It creates division, doesn't it? And there's no crossover or coming together of minds and like you say, checking in. How's this crossover with what you're, researching or your evidence base case studies? And I think, in the end, like you say, it is a big business on for a lot of people. Um, and yeah, there's a lot of closed mind. I mean, the UFO thing, I totally get that because I've had a few things like that myself with around the possibility of these UFOs, like you might mention, being interdimensional or even coming from our side of the fence as illusion technology.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
present that to some ufologists, they're like, "Oh, can't have that," because they're so invested in that these are visitors from another.
Yeah, I mean, there's different levels of being invested. You know,
Yeah,
you've got the you know the again the high profile people who are making money out of this.
yeah,
They're incredibly invested in it, and if they're as soon as they lose that relevance or they lose their debate, they lose their money,
yeah,
they lose their income, they lose their fame if that's what they're into, all that kind of stuff. But it comes right the way down to your grassroots investigators. You know, the people that meet at like BUFOG and all
yeah,
these little UFO groups,
yeah,
they've spent, you know, they don't have anything riding on it in terms of money or finance or
yeah,
anything like that, but they've spent years and years invested in this,
yeah,
following these people, buying their books, going to the talks, watching the TV shows. So they have to buy into it as well. And then, you know, so they find it difficult to shift that mentality
yeah,
to buy into another theory because their ego won't let them, you know, that they're so invested in it. They just can't accept that there's potentially another answer, another
yeah,
possibility.
yeah,
They just cannot do it, you know, and it's a shame, but it happens all around. You know, it's not just within this, is it? It happens in
yeah,
life in general.
yeah,
But I think the second that we can come together and begin to have healthy debate, but also accept other people's research and bring it into our own. And the second we can do that, the second we can probably progress and begin to get answers into what all of this is and what's going on.
yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Like you say, especially in the UFO thing, because I think there's a lot of fixed ideas or theories um, around that, and I think there's probably more very myopic,
Mm.
short-sightedness, and
Yeah, I
anybody
mean,
who thinks outside of that,
the the the
completely
the, the, U-
ostracized.
the UFO thing. Coming back to the COVID thing, it blows my mind because again, just like the paranormal people brought the whole COVID narrative, it was the same with the UFO people as well, predominantly. And what blew my mind there was these ufologists have spent their lives believing that the government have got this huge cover up. You know, they've lied about alien technology, Area 51, Roswell crash.
Yeah,
The aliens have been visiting us for years. They think all this is happening, but the government have covered it up. The government have lied. The government have, for whatever reason, the government aren't telling them the truth.
yeah,
But when it came to COVID, the government were being honest. They were doing what was best for them, and I'm like, but how can you think that on one hand the government are lying and they can't be trusted, but
yeah,
then when it comes to this, they're telling you the truth.
yeah,
You know, it's the same thing. It's the same government. You know, you that it if your wife cheated on you, and you took her back, you would then forever be doubting. You would have these kind of trust issues.
Yeah.
So why do these people do it with the government? That
Yeah.
the same government that were proven to lie about the weapons of mass destruction and all that kind of stuff, were telling you the truth about COVID. And it is so when I was watching these ufologists and these paranormal researchers really buying into it, despite really rallying against the government for years and years, I didn't get that double standard. I just didn't understand how their thought process was working with that. But it
Yeah.
shows how unopen they are to accepting these kind of wider possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I get what you mean with that. It is, I don't want to use the word painful, but it was quite painful to observe the lack of critical, being open critically to what we're being told and questioning
Yeah.
what we're meant to
Yeah.
do.
But that
Everything.
they'll be critical about some potentially fake photo of a UFO found back in the 70s, and they'll do hours and hours of research on it and analysis. Yet, when the COVID thing came about and it was blatant what was going on,
Right.
they couldn't do it. They couldn't bring themselves to be critical. They couldn't bring themselves to question what was going on. But
Yeah.
they'd happily sit in their room and analyze UFO photos and analyze all this stuff that in my mind is of importance. It's important,
Yeah.
but that's not impacting your life as much as what happened over the past few years. So if a lot of those people who have fantastic analytical skills, in what they do from the UFO field, and
Yeah.
not just UFOs but the ghosts and all, if they took that analytical skill set and applied it to other things in the world, like the COVID scam and all that kind, 9/11 and all that stuff, that their world would change, and they would begin to see things for what they really are, and then we would have a bigger base of people. More people would kind of come
Yeah.
over to our way of thinking. But I think partly because they're scared, they know that if they did it, they would find things they're not comfortable with, so that
Yeah.
they're almost burying their head in the sand. But also just because they some of them, they just don't understand it. They just can't comprehend that this is potentially happening. And that's a really long-winded way of me saying that when I go to these people and say, well, do you not think aliens could be interdimensional, not interplanetary? And they go, no. They don't, not it's not even like they don't even think, oh, that's possible. It's just a straight no.
Well,
And
for me, that would solve the time issue.
yeah,
Linear time and
yeah,
being
yeah,
interdimensional, doesn't it? It's a
yeah.
non-starter then, isn't it? Time.
Well, I mean, I mentioned in the presentation about how some of the people I've spoken to, abductees, it's actually becoming a more accepted theory now that they're not actually abducted.
Yeah.
That the abduction scene is brought to them. So there's a lot of talk about how they might not even be leaving their bed or their car or wherever it is that they're having this experience. What's actually happening is their reality, their surroundings are being altered to make it look like they are now on this ship, or they are now, wherever they are, but they actually haven't left the space that they're in.
Yeah.
Now, if that's possible, it goes to show how our reality isn't really our reality. It can be manipulated. But again, it's getting them to really understand this, because it is becoming more popular, that type of theory, but it is still
metaphysical.
yeah.
A bit like what you're mentioning there, sort of ties in with how we dream, doesn't it? A dream is as real as can be, and can cause a physiological response in your body when you lay in your bed. I don't want to get graphic, but a wet dream.
I was going to talk about a sweaty dream, Mark, but fine, we'll go with that one.
So that's something that we're sort of creating, or is coming somewhere in my dream, which is as real as they call, is, and then you're getting a physiological response. So it's not beyond
but that's what
I'm
happens
the
in everyday
same.
life, isn't it? You know, you're creating this reality in your head. You know,
Yeah.
the room that you're sat in now, what you can see, and that environment that you're in creates that physical response from your body. So when you're lying in bed, you know, I get these kind of if ever I'm running in my dream or I've got like a really high intensity type dream, I always wake up in a sweat,
Yes.
like
Yeah.
I actually have been
Yeah.
running. And of course, there's that question of, well, are you hot and sweaty in bed? So therefore, that's made the
Mm.
dream, you know, to try and explain to yourself why you're sweaty, or is it the other way around where you've been running in a dream and that's elicited this response from your
Yeah.
body?
Yeah.
If that's the case, then that's only what's happening now in what we would call an awakened state, where
Yeah.
we're moving around and that elicits a response. You know, if it's cold, then I get the chills. If it's hot, I begin to sweat. And
Yeah.
that's the same in bed. If I have a dream where I'm hot, I begin to sweat.
Yeah.
So is how real are those dreams? You know, because at the
Yeah.
time, as you say, they are real.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So it's a really fascinating subject to get into what what is a dream and what is reality, things that have been looked at by various, like, I'm a big fan of David Lynch, and he's really big into, like, transcendental meditation, and
Yeah.
a lot of the works that he does, like Twin Peaks and stuff. He talks about how we're living in a dream
Mm.
basically, and he blurs the lines between dreams and reality.
Right.
So it's a really fascinating subject to get into, that is.
It is. It is. And I think, like you say, it crosses over in so many areas. I mean, for me, as well, saying that, like you say, it crosses over into, ghosts, Bigfoot, uh, and again, you know, possibly 9/11, in some ways,
Yeah,
um, with this illusion thing, technology that they could possibly use to, create the reality that
yeah,
people can observe. So it's a very powerful thing. Like you say, dreaming. I mean, you be reduced to tears in a dream, and you wake up and you've been crying. So yeah, there is a lot in that, especially the metaphysical
yes,
aspect and quantum physics.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
so yeah, I mean, just to not shift away too much from that, but some of the equipment, because I've ever heard of a guy called Chris Fleming. He used to do Dead Famous. You might not have done years ago. He's into a lot of the equipment, spirit box and all that. I mean, you mentioned quite a lot in your book. You do a little bit of a breakdown of some of
yes,
the EMF, pendulum, spirit board, spirit box. I know Chris Fleming's quite big on that
yeah, yeah.
spirit box. I mean, where do you stand with a lot of that and the sort of using some of
Um,
these new technologies like?
so one of the I have got like a presentation that I do give sometimes, about traditional methods versus modern technology.
Yeah,
And when you talk about the traditional methods, we're talking about the scrying, the
yeah,
spirit boards, things that don't rely on technology. And by
yeah,
that I mean like batteries or Wi-Fi and stuff like that, because that kind of stuff can be easily manipulated. It can be manipulated by
definitely.
the user. It can be manipulated by outside external forces, like the K2 meters can be affected by things such as your mobile phone going off or a walkie-talkie. So I try and I think I'm more of a traditionalist if I had to pick a camp, So
Yeah,
I love a spirit board. Again, they are easy to manipulate. If someone wants to, pretend and try and force the glass around the board, they can do that. But there are ways that you can prevent that from happening, So we tend to ask people to put their finger upside down on the glass, so their nail is touching the rim of the glass.
right.
So then that makes it quite slippy, and it
Yeah,
makes it difficult to really push or pull a glass.
yeah,
Um, and I mean, I've been on a spirit board where the glass has moved with no one touching it.
yeah,
So I mean, and just keep it kind of entertaining for your listeners. That a story that we investigated Smethwick swimming baths,
right.
and
Okay.
we decided to do a spirit board. So there was only me and another investigator called Les at the time, and we were in a big corridor, and it was like, I think right at the bottom of the corridor, you turn left, and you're in like what I would call a boiler room, but there was no way out. It was just one way in, and it was the same way back out.
Right.
And then back up the corridor, there were a couple of doors, and I think they were like staff rooms. So that's where the staff would go for their lunch or whatever, or to have meetings. and then you'd be back out into the foyer, the main foyer of the swimming pool.
Yeah.
So we would look, everyone was in there, but then everybody disappeared. So, but me and Les hung around, and this other guy hung around. He was just a guest. I don't know his name or anything, but we decided to put the spirit boards. We didn't have anywhere because we were in a corridor, so we lent it on a windowsill. There was just enough room to put it on the windowsill, and we started to move this glass, and it started to answer questions. And this guy, out of nowhere, said, "I think this is my dad." And I
Right.
got a bit skeptical, and I said, "Well, what's made you think that?" Oh, just some of the things he's saying. I said, "Okay, fine." I said, "Well, you take your finger off the glass and just leave me and Les, and but you ask the questions." So he asked about 9 or 10 questions, and me and Les answered every single one correctly. And it was things like, "What's the name of my eldest son? What's my wife's name? How did you die? What street did we grow up on?" We answered every single question correctly, but he wasn't touching the glass. So what's going on there? I mean, if it's not his dad moving the glass, then there's some form of like telekinesis going on, he
Yeah.
or something. He's telling us,
Yeah.
and we're moving the glass, which is just as interesting as it being a
Yeah.
ghost moving the glass. But so they can be manipulated, but you can there's also ways of making sure that they're not manipulated, and that was one way that we certainly did that. The more that you have these kind of modern technologies, these modern equipment, which I do think are good, and that's your ultraviolet torches, your infrared cameras, your thermal imaging cameras. I think they're really good because they allow us to see outside of the perceptive range. Talking of that, did you get in like a weird? Did you get a weird thing on your?
I can hear something like a fan in the
Yeah,
background. It
yeah, that
comes
was like
and
some
goes.
weird. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
How weird.
Maybe it's my
Um,
computer. Maybe my computer, and this mic being so sensitive after it being
um,
careful. Look, so it's
right. No, like that kind of interference you get from like a mobile or something. If
yeah,
yeah. Anyway, so things like the infrared cameras, the ultraviolet stuff like that allows us to see outside of our perceptive range. So they help us, they aid us, they show us things we might not normally see or hear. But then you get right the way up to these mobile phone apps,
right,
and and the things that are on there. You have these things like um, uh, kind of like spirit boxes, but it's they've obviously got some word banks, and they've got pre-recorded words stored in them.
yeah,
And I've been on investigations where the whole night has been based around these bloody mobile phone apps, because you think it's combining the best of both worlds for these people, because if they're not ghost hunting, they're addicted to their phones on Instagram or Facebook or
yeah,
whatever. So now they get the best of both worlds. They can ghost hunt whilst feeding their addiction of being on their phone. So for them, it's great. For me, it's a nightmare because you've got the light off the phone kind of blinding you while you're trying to, relax and,
yeah,
absorb the atmosphere. It's shouting out words. So they've got it on, the loudest possible volume. So it's distracting. But what they tend to do is they build up a whole case study off these apps. So
right,
I've been on one investigation where they've turned this app on and it's gone girl. And they go, "Oh, there's a girl here. There's a girl in the room. Where are you, girl? Where are you?" And then it's gone. It hasn't answered their question, and it's gone fire. And they've gone, "Oh, there was a fire here. Did you burn? Did you burn in the fire?" And then it's come up with over here. She's
yeah,
over here. It doesn't tell her where,
yeah,
but they've decided there's a corner. She's over there, And then 15 minutes later, we leave the room having completely created this backstory of a 6-year-old girl who burnt in a fire. She was stood in the corner while we were doing our investigation. She can't leave because she doesn't know where her mum and dad are, or some rubbish.
yeah,
And that's it. They firmly believe they've just completely fabricated this story from 10 minutes using this mobile phone app. But then a 2-minute Google search will show you that there's never been a fire recorded at the location. No girls have ever been recorded as being,
yeah,
killed or dying there. So it's clearly rubbish. And then we moved and we ended up going up to another room, which was the other big building, the other side of the building upstairs. And then it came up with girl. And I was like, here we go again. And I'm going, oh, it's a girl, it's another girl. Or is it the same girl? Maybe she's followed us. Where are you, girl? Fire. Oh, it's another, it's the same, it's a fire. And you think, no, have you not just considered that there's only so many words in this thing and you're just
Yeah,
getting the same thing coming up? But they can't see it, to them, this is real. That is solid evidence that ghosts exist. And you just think, and then there's another app called there's loads like it, but
yeah,
one's called
yeah.
Ghost Radar, and the screen of the app is like a submarine kind of
All right.
thing going
Yeah.
around, and you got all these blibs and blobs, and then it will come up with like a little skull or something because it's detected a ghost over there, so it'll be like beep beep beep,
All
and I go,
right.
oh,
Yeah.
there's a ghost over by the radiator or something, and you just think, this phone, how has that got right? Has it got it built in? Has it?
Yeah.
Like, how is this what? How is this what? It's just rubbish. But these people again will base a whole investigation around it. So, to answer your question, I hate the technology involved with ghost hunting. Again, another reason I don't tend to go with these bigger groups anymore, because this is the kind of thing they offer you. They offer you this kind of equipment, and it's just a nightmare. It's distracting, it's inaccurate, it's misleading, it's too relied upon to give
Yeah.
what they would call evidence. So the longer I've done it, the smaller my kit bag has got.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
might,
Yeah.
I have a spirit board. I have an EVP recorder. I might have maybe like a REM pod or a K2 meter or something just for
Yeah.
reference. But that is about it. Video camera, that's it. That's it. And of course the most important tool of all, me.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Because I can trust me. I know that if I've seen something or if I haven't seen something, I know that it's not a fake mobile phone app. I know that it's not something being messed up with by your phone signal. All
Mm.
of that, I know that what I see is what I see, and I can trust myself.
Yeah. Yeah. The
So
integrity, isn't it? I guess as well.
yes,
Integrity of what you're doing, and
exactly.
yeah.
But of course, that doesn't really get advertised much because someone can't sell me, for an overinflated price on a ghost website like they do with all these other pieces of equipment.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they try and sell all these pieces of equipment hugely overpriced, when there's no evidence that any of them actually work. But
Yeah.
but people keep buying them and people keep using them, so it's a seller's market. But for me, the less used, the better. Like we've got a local
Less is
graveyard.
more.
Less
Less
is
is
more in
more.
this case, 100%.
Yeah.
Less is more. We've got a local graveyard here in the village, and I keep meaning to. I walk through there on an evening. It's quite creepy.
Yeah.
Um, I find myself walking a little bit quicker if it's dark when I'm walking through there,
Yeah.
and but I do keep trying to make a point of just maybe it's been raining a lot, but I'm just going to go and just sit.
Mm.
And it's not just because it's a graveyard, but it's just a nice, peaceful, relaxing place in the village, and just sit and see what we get, see what I
Yeah.
experience, because this equipment is distracting. When people have got their head in these phone apps, when people are staring at a K2 meter waiting for the light to change, when people are staring at a glass on a spirit board waiting for it to move, they're missing so much more around them.
Yeah.
They're missing their senses trying to tell them something is
Yes.
stood behind you, something's just touched you, but because they're so focused on this. So I try to just pick a corner. If I'm wearing a hoodie, I pull my hood up, I relax, I zone out,
Yeah.
I eat the odd sweet, and I just like really try and tune into the atmosphere and see what I get. And
Yeah.
for me, it works.
Yes. Yes.
Um, it's just that I imagine it would work for a lot of people. They just don't give it that time.
Oh, yeah. I think what you're driving at there is we're probably the best sensitives, aren't we? Than a
Mm,
technology,
yes.
and if we're not sort of engaging in our, perhaps beyond the 5 cents sometimes, then we're not going to pick anything up, are we? We're not going to be drawn to something, or you know, because that can happen, doesn't it? You can be drawn to somewhere, and pick up things,
Yeah, I mean, like
synchronistic or whatever.
the experiences I've had through empathy and
Yeah,
through empathetic feelings, and just sitting there in a corner, and you just catch a light out of the corner of your eye, like a
yeah,
dancing orb or something, and
yeah,
you just think, oh, or a shadow or something that people aren't seeing because they're so invested in this equipment that they're using. It's like, oh, did you see that? And then it's gone, and then no one else has seen it, and
yeah,
so you just kind of go back to just sitting on your own, and that's why um, going on these big groups where there's 20, 30, 40 of you crammed into these rooms, it's just a noise. It's a noise on every level, and physically and mentally. So if I do go on these kind of nights, I do ask, is there going to be a time where we can split up and I can go away on my own and
yeah.
do a bit? And people might be wondering, well, why do you just go on these nights? Why don't you just go to these places yourself? Well, that's because of cost. These
Mm,
places have they've got greedy. They're charging like Shrewsbury Prison, which is just up the road from me now.
right.
They charge like £1,000 for a night's investigation.
Wow,
You know,
that's
there's no chance I could get into
yeah,
anywhere like that
yeah,
on my own. And if I could, there's things I'd rather spend £1,000 on. So
yeah,
you've kind of got to go with these groups because 60,
yeah,
70 quid is a lot better, you know.
yes, yeah,
Um, but that's what's happened with these places, and so I do. If ever I need a fix, I do just tend to go with these groups and
yes, yeah.
pay my fee and put up with the technology and put up with the crap that's going on. But I do try and make sure that I have a time just for me to kind of
Right.
zone out
Right.
and
Well, just to mention then, Kieran, because your first book, which is that one, which you again very kindly sent me that book and signed it. This is all about tells you all about that equipment, doesn't it? And
yeah,
breaks it all down.
it does. Yeah, yeah.
And sort of like that's the first step, isn't it, for somebody who's perhaps
That,
interested?
yeah, yeah. That's what it was. It was this kind of trying to tell people that it's not the most haunted program. It's
Yeah,
this is what ghost hunting is about. And
yeah,
hopefully get people onto the road of doing it properly.
yeah. And then the second book was talking about your experiences, wasn't it?
Well, it was the next logical step.
Yeah,
So the people that have kind of brought into the first book and they've gone out and started investigating, they're now beginning to have experiences with the equipment and with the things that we've spoke about in the first book. So I
yeah,
was trying to think of how can I explain these experiences, giving some of my own examples. And so I went down the route of with UFOs where you have the CE categories,
yes,
all the
yeah,
way up to CE7 or whatever it is.
yeah,
So I decided to break it down into like audible, visual, physical, interference. I can't remember what the other two were. There were six altogether, but each chapter is on one of those, and it talks about what equipment you would use to be capturing that kind of experience, and the giving a few examples and stories
yeah,
of,
yeah.
of my own experiences as well.
But you did touch on it just not long ago. It was about empathic experiences and
Oh
that.
yeah, that was one of them.
In the
Yeah,
book,
empathy,
you didn't-
empathetic. Yeah,
yeah, empathetic. Yeah, sorry.
yeah.
So I mean, so that really takes in some good stuff at the back there, like you say, the ship, the house, where there's a lot of stuff in that, and the
the
cottage.
ship the ship is
Yeah,
a story that my dad tells, so it's not all about me. It was about the stories that I got told when I was growing up. So the ship, um so my dad was a stoker in the navy, and so
right. Oh wow, yeah,
he was yeah, so he was in the Falklands War, and
right.
his job was to go down right down into the bowels of the ship,
Yeah,
check all the controls, the oil level, all that kind of stuff.
yeah,
So there was a night where they'd been out at sea for a month or so or whatever, and it was my dad's shift to go down into so he lifts the hatch up or whatever. This is how he explained it to me. I'm not into boats or anything, but
yeah,
he goes down this ladder into a a fairly sized room with all these control panels, and he's checking it. He's doing all his checks, and then this guy comes down the ladder and shakes his hand, asks him how he's doing, pats him on the shoulder, tells him to keep up the good work, and disappears back up the ladder.
Yeah.
He said he said he knows it's cliche, but he looked like Uncle Albert from Only Fools and Horses.
Right.
And but he said he was physically there. He was stood in front of me. We shook hands. So my dad finished what he was doing, went back up to what they call the mess room,
Yeah.
and said to one of his mates, "Who's the new chief stoker? I've not seen him before." And they said, "We don't have a chief. We don't have one. He's not coming on until we get to the next port."
Right.
And my dad said, "No, no, no. I've just seen him. He's just come down and checked that everything was okay." And then another guy pipes up and says, "Oh, you've seen him then as well."
Ah, right.
And my dad said, "Yeah, of course I've just seen him. I've just told you what he looks like." And the bloke said, "No, he's not alive. He's not here." And that,
An apparition. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So that that's just one of those stories that
Wow.
my dad told me. It's all about. That's when I was really getting into it when I was younger. Just
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah. Yeah.
hearing those stories, and that's what kind of really got me engaged and excited about looking into
Yeah.
stuff like this.
Yeah. I mean, I do like some of the terms in there, like you mentioned in your again in the presentation, like the most haunted effect, because
Yeah,
that program seemed to, well, it's entertainment, isn't it? And that's solely
if
what it
you
is. Yeah.
if you can accept it for what it is,
Yeah.
then it's kind of fun, you know.
Yeah.
Like wrestling, I know
Yeah.
grown adults that watch wrestling.
Yeah.
They know it's fake. Well, there's grown adults that participate in politics. They know it's fake, but they
Yeah.
but they still engage in it.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same with the most haunted thing. I mean, I grew up watching that.
Yeah.
It played a part. It got me interested in it.
Of
I
course.
remember sitting with my dad when I was like 10, 11 years
Yeah.
old, watching Most Haunted. It was like a thing that we would do every week.
Yeah.
We'd get excited about the live shows. We'd watch the live shows, and they came to Dudley Castle. It was great. But then when I actually began to do my own research, and YouTube came about, and you could see videos of trickery and
I
fakery.
agree. Yeah. Yeah.
I really began to lose my passion for it.
I know what you mean.
Um, but it played a part. But it's like I say, if you know what it is, if you can accept it for what it is, which is just entertainment,
Yeah.
then fine. But unfortunately, a lot of people take it as gospel. A lot of
Yeah.
people worship these kind of people, and so yeah, that's what spawned that first book
Yeah.
really, to try and get people back onto what it's actually all about. And
Yes.
I never mentioned Most Haunted in the book.
No, no. I just remember it at the presentation, and I thought, oh, I quite like that phrase you coined or termed, which was the most haunted effect.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
quite like that because it did sum up of, just the hysterical screaming and yeah, but
Yeah, and it happens, we've been
yeah,
on investigations where people have done that and screamed and ran away, and it's no one really knows how they're going to react when they get into it.
mm,
You go with the full intention of seeing a ghost, but
yeah,
if and when you do, you don't know how you're going to react. It's not something that happens every day,
yeah,
you know. It's kind of like UFOs. People say, "Why didn't you take a photo?" Well, because it literally didn't cross my mind
yeah,
to take my phone out. I was like looking at this thing, thinking, "What the hell is this thing?"
exactly.
The last thing on my mind was to get my phone out and take a photo.
Yeah,
So it's that kind of, you don't know how you're going to react until it happens.
yeah,
Whereas, yeah, I know what you're talking about. The Yvette Fielding running around screaming thing gets a bit tiresome quite
yeah,
quickly.
yeah, yeah. Like you say, it was a good show to introduce you to them type of things, and I visited a few of them places myself, what they went to and stuff, which is all very exciting years ago, and you're sort of getting into it. But just to touch on as well, because just quickly, I know we're nearing the end. Don't want to keep you up all night. I know you need your
My,
beauty sleep.
my son does enough of that.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So, because you did this film, didn't you? This documentary film.
Yeah, yeah,
Just
yeah.
want to briefly
Thanks for
mention
bringing that
that,
up.
Kieran, because it's a good film. I have watched it, and some of the evidence in there is really compelling, quite intriguing as well. What went on?
Yeah, it's so this is based on a family that we investigated down in Essex.
Yeah,
So the documentary is called A Haunting in Essex.
yeah,
You can find it on YouTube. We went down several times. Still in contact with the family now. I think I'm going back down again in a few weeks. We decided to document what was going on. You know, we captured a lot of evidence. We put up some motion sensor cameras in the house to try and capture
Yeah.
things when the family weren't around. And this family were and still are, not as much so, but living in utter fear. Utter fear. You
Yeah.
know, it is they were being terrorized. You've seen them yourself.
Yes.
Photos of the children with scratches on the back, videos of them being punched, pennies being thrown at them.
Yeah.
Or children were being strangled while they were lying in bed. All of this was going on.
Yeah.
So when we made the documentary, it was almost not about the haunting that took a back seat. It was more about the family's experiences and how they were overcoming it and how that what they were doing to tackle this in the hope that should someone else out there be having a similar experience, they could kind of see that there is hope, there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah.
So that was the aim of it. It was to get the family's message out, and I think we did it well. You know, there was myself
Absolutely.
and a friend of mine, Dan Hughes, who he used to run Truth Juice Bristol,
Okay.
but he also does Solarware, Soulaware, Solarware, on YouTube. So he used to he films. He's done a lot with Michael Feely, actually. I think he did a documentary for
Right.
Michael Feely.
Yeah.
So I decided to get in touch with him and ask him if he wouldn't mind just coming and being my cameraman and being my editor and basically being the guy that makes the thing. You know, I'm just a
Yeah.
bloke that
Yeah.
stands there and talks. He did all of the hard work. And you know, I've got a friend who does music production, so he was kind enough to do the backing track and
Yeah.
the narration and all that. So between the three of us, but again mainly Dan, we managed to do this over the course of a year. You know, collect the evidence, do the
Yeah.
interviews. This is all while working full time and having families and jobs. You know,
People forget that.
they do. They absolutely do. We've not made it. If anything, it's cost us money. You know,
Of course.
we had to pay for like the images that we used or
Yeah.
the music that was used or you know the petrol and all that stuff.
Yes. Of course.
It cost us money to make, and but it wasn't about that. It was about just getting that message out there.
Yeah.
There was a part of me that hoped it would get picked up by someone who would say, right, let's put this on a bit of a bigger platform again, just
Yeah.
to get that message out there. But, you know, it's on YouTube. It's 45, 46 minutes long or whatever it is. Um, Not much longer than an episode of Corrie, so it's not going to take up too much of your time.
Yeah.
But it's a really good watch with some really good evidence. I'll be doing a follow up probably soon with the
Oh,
family,
great.
just a short 15-minute chat with them to follow
Yeah.
what's been going on. And then hopefully, you know, we can get into some more locations or some more investigations and team up again, me and Dan,
Yeah.
and do it in another place and for another family or another business or something.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's very well done. I'm dead impressed, and it's
Well,
fascinating.
we wanted it to be very objective. Like we actually made a point at the start. We wondered if it was going to make people laugh or not. But it comes up with a bit of writing at the start
Oh,
saying if you're in this for the jump scares or something, then
yeah.
this isn't going to be for you, you know, because it
Yeah.
literally is just some evidence and interviews with the family. There's no jump scares, there's no scary music, there's no Yvette Fielding screaming, running around. We really didn't want it to be like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say we were tempted, but it was an option. It was we
Yeah.
could have taken it that way
Of
if
course.
we wanted, but
Yeah.
we didn't want to do it like that. I mean, I kept using the word Louis Theroux. I kept saying I want it to be like a Louis Theroux type documentary,
I
you
know
know,
what you
where
mean. Yeah.
he just talks to the family in their own environment, and you
Yeah.
get a sense for what's going on.
Yeah.
Dan hates Louis Theroux, so he wouldn't let me use that term. But
Yeah.
he knew what I was trying to say, and I think we captured it really well. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I don't really promote my stuff as much as I probably should do.
Yeah.
So yeah, it would be nice if people went and watched that and shared it around and
Yeah.
spread it around and gave me some feedback on it. You know, I'm always open to feedback. But yeah, I'm proud of that. You know,
Yeah.
you sit back and you think, well, you've written two books and you've made a documentary, and you think that's actually quite a lot while having a family and working a
A
job and
lot.
stuff.
It is a lot, you
You know,
know.
but we all do it though, Mark. You know, you give up your time to do this, to do the research that you do, to write the blogs that you do, to the book that you're writing on 9/11. People don't see this. You know, people don't see that the group that we run on once a month, people turn up, the chairs are all laid out, the speaker's ready to talk.
Yeah,
They turn up, they watch the speaker, and they leave. They don't see the hour, 2 hours before setting everything up,
yeah,
the weeks of chasing speakers to make sure they're going to be there. They're staying till not getting home till gone midnight because you've had to tidy up the room after
yeah.
everybody's gone. It's that side of this kind of thing that we do that people just don't get. You know,
No,
they
no.
watch the documentary on YouTube and they say, "Well, that was shit," and they don't really understand or try
Hard
to
work.
accept. You know,
Yeah, it's time as well. It's not just the money; it's the time you put in. You know, like you say, alongside family life and your work life, and and at times sacrificing both of them in your leisure time to
yes,
do this stuff.
that's exactly right.
And it's
But
hard.
we do it because we want to get some answers.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Exactly. That's why we're driven to do that type of thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
And it's a great film, and I just want to put a little thing in there. Is you was very meticulous because I have seen that footage when I was at the presentation when the guy gets punched
yes,
and the pennies being thrown. You're
yeah.
very meticulous where them cameras were placed to
We
rule out a lot of if
yeah.
if somebody was trying to instigate fakery. So you sort of ruling that out with where things
It
were played.
was it was a case of that, but it was also a case. I mean, it's hardly Buckingham Palace. You know,
Yeah,
it's a three up, two
yeah,
down type house. So there are only so many places you could put the cameras. But
yeah,
we already had a sense of where most of the activity was. It was the
mm,
staircase, it was the landing,
yeah,
and it was the hallway at the bottom of the stairs. Nothing ever really happened in the living room. Nothing ever happened in the kitchen.
yeah,
So straight away downstairs, we know it's got to be focusing on the stairs. It's got to be
yeah,
focusing on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Upstairs, there's that video of where Lee captures the shadow running across and
yes,
slamming the
yes,
door.
yes,
So we put the camera up that end of the hallway, nothing behind it, no doorway, nothing to get in the way, just filming. So as it was aiming at the top of the stairs, because again, that's where a lot of the activity was. So we tried to aim it around the where we'd had that activity, where we'd had those interactions. I think it's one of those where if we'd have put them somewhere else, we would have probably caught something else.
yeah,
It but we were lucky with what we caught where we'd put the cameras.
yeah,
And as far as I'm aware, she's ordering more cameras because we got rid of them. We were done.
yeah,
But she's brought some more, so we're going to look at setting them up again
yeah,
and and and
brilliant.
and maybe try them in different places this time.
Yeah, 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 and just I hope that all goes well. With this, the follow up that'll be really interesting because that film has got some compelling evidence in, and I shall link everything, all your, what you do, your books, the
Yep,
film will all be linked in the show notes.
great.
Just like I did with the presentation. And just finally, just quickly, I think another in your presentation, another compelling bit of evidence was when you was actually doing a presentation, you could actually hear your name being called. You
Yeah, well
thought you was the only person who heard that, but it was,
well that was the time I met Dan, the guy
yeah,
who made the documentary on this. That was at Truth Juice in Bristol.
right,
Dan won't mind me saying, but I went all the way down to Bristol on a work night, paid for my parking, paid for had some tea down there, got there, and there were five people in the audience. Managed to sell a couple of books. I think Dan said I can give you a tenner. That's all I can give
yeah,
you. Didn't even cover the parking in the city centre.
yeah.
Um, so it was a really, but you do it.
You just,
We've
yeah,
done it in bands probably, Mark. I mean,
yeah,
I've played in front of a couple of thousand, and I've played in front of three people, and that was like my parents and my missus or something. So,
yeah,
and even they walked out. So you kind of get used to that, but it was disappointing. Anyway, while I was on stage, that why I've mentioned that is because it helps you understand why it couldn't have been someone out there because I
Yeah.
literally, there were 5 people sat in front of me. You know, it was obviously not them.
Yeah.
So I stood on stage and just talking, doing my thing, and then you hear this. I heard someone saying, "Kieran." So as I turned away to look at the screen, and then I turned back and said, "Yeah," and
Yeah.
then like just silence, and I thought, "Oh, I thought somebody called my name,"
Yeah.
and then someone starts muttering something, and then I go, "Okay," so I carry on, and that was it. Literally thought nothing of it. Never crossed my mind again. And about 2 weeks later, I had an email from Dan. He'd obviously been editing the because he filmed me and had little like you do with yours, had a little mic on my chest. And he sends me this email and he says, "See what you think of this." So I've had a listen, and it's him, his footage, and he's actually captured that time, that moment, and it's you hear it on the footage. It's a voice clearly saying Kieran,
Yeah. Yeah.
and me reacting to it and then thinking nothing more of it.
Yeah.
So when that happens, or when that happens, that is fantastic because you think,
Oh,
right, I'm not mad, I'm not losing my mind.
yeah.
It's I did hear someone say my name, and it was picked up clear as day,
Yeah.
clear as day.
I mean, it's captured on the video. He
Yeah,
thought somebody called my name. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
He
It's
stopped, didn't he? Reacted to it, which
I,
is even.
I reacted to it. I heard it.
Yeah.
Even now. I mean, God, this is years ago. But I can remember it just like it was yesterday. And then when we actually had it picked up on footage, because there's something I explained in the book. Actually capturing evidence is so rare.
Yeah.
You go on these ghost hunts, and actually catching something is incredibly rare. So, and it's when you're not trying. I'm just there giving a presentation.
Mm.
I've paid money to go on ghost hunts and not caught anything anywhere near as good as that.
Yeah.
And there I am just giving a presentation in a cafe in Bristol, and lo and behold, I get one of the best pieces of evidence I could have asked for.
Oh,
That's how it works.
yeah. It was great evidence. Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And just before we wrap up, then, so no, I don't want to keep you bored. You are working on a third book. I think.
Oh God, you've had
But
to say that.
yeah,
I'm like 2 chapters in. Um, it's provisionally titled "Theories of a Paranormal Investigator." So again, it's that next logical
yeah,
step. It's that
yeah,
they've had their experiences. Now they're beginning to think, right, what's actually going on here? What
yeah,
could it be? And it's just an objective look at, certain like the stone tape theory or
yeah,
time slips and all these different possibilities as to what could be going on when we experience a ghost sighting.
yeah,
Um, but it's going slow, Mark. It's
yeah,
we've since I literally typed my first word, we've moved house. I've started a new job. I'm running this group that we run every month.
yeah.
I'm raising a kid. It's I don't know how people do it. I mean, you look at there's a guy called Nick Redfern. If you've probably heard of him.
Oh, yeah. I've got a couple of
Um,
these books.
yeah, yeah. Well, a
Yeah,
couple of his books. I mean, this guy
got those.
releases a book every week.
Yeah,
Um, how he does it? I mean, well, quality and quantity are two different things, probably in this respect. But he's releasing a book every week,
yeah, yeah,
and I can't. So I think I'd spent some like with my second book. I had a bit of a writer's block with that. That took me quite a while to finish,
yeah,
but I got to a point where it's when I wasn't trying to force it. So I'd just be sat watching telly, and then another few paragraphs would just pop into my head, and I'd be like, "Oh, okay,"
yeah,
and I'd just type them down. So inspiration, as you again as a musician, inspiration comes at the weirdest of times.
oh, it does.
It does. People in my band will tell you that most of the lyrics that I've written came from me being on the toilet. Don't ask me why. That was just
Yeah,
when inspiration would strike.
yeah,
In fact, there's one song on our album that the lyrics were literally shouted by me on the toilet through the studio wall into the producer, who was then telling the singer in the room to write down the words.
Right.
And then 10 minutes later, it was recorded as the vocal on the final track. So,
Brilliant.
so inspiration comes at the strangest of times, and
Better get on the toilet then.
so I've learned to just don't try and force it. You know, I could be
Yeah.
I could be out mowing the lawn, and it'll just be, oh, there's a section of the book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm not, I'm self-published. I don't have an agency or whatever telling me I've got a
Yeah.
deadline. So there's no rush, and no one's really desperate to read another one of my books. I don't think so. I'm not putting too much pressure on myself really, and it'll happen when it happens.
Well, to be honest, you've done a sterling job with these.
Well, thank you. I mean, I appreciate
Seriously.
it. I
And the
appreciate it.
film, and these will all be linked, and I really encourage people to get hold of them and watch the film and turn up to the groups you run. Well, the group, the
Yeah, so
Free
let's a
Thinking
quick plug for
Society.
that. Let's do a quick So the Free Thinking Society, we meet the second Monday of every month at the Mitre in Stourbridge. We have different talkers on. We have people. We've got Michael Feely coming
Wow,
next month. Oh, it's a huge scoop.
yeah.
A huge scoop.
That is
Yeah, he's coming
great
to
researcher and writer. Yeah,
he's coming to talk about his book, The Secret of Secrets.
yeah,
We've had people like Andrew Johnson there talking about
yeah.
climate change. We've had people
Really
talking about
great research.
UFOs, all this stuff. You're probably going to come and do a talk about 9/11 hopefully soon.
Yeah,
So different things. But yeah, if you're local to the West Midlands area, it's a fiver to get in for a good few hours of entertainment.
and
Come
a
along.
raffle.
Yeah.
And a raffle.
Yeah. Oh, the raffle, the famous raffle. Yeah. Yeah, we have some great prizes in the raffle.
Yeah.
It's worth it
Thermal
alone.
socks, was it? Or something?
Thermal socks and 8 little plastic tubs, wasn't it? Martin will probably watch this, but people, I'm convinced that people go for Martin's raffle prizes.
Yeah, 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 definitely. Yeah, they're good. And I did win once when I was there.
But what did you get?
Do you know? I can't
Didn't you
remember.
get the oil, like the peppermint oil or something? No,
No,
you had a bottle of beer.
no, it wasn't. It was something like the thermal, something. It was something like that, like a hat or something.
Yeah,
Go with my other
it's
10.
it's those socks that give off heat or
Yeah,
something, isn't it? Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. And it was quite a while ago. I remember I won the raffle and I thought, oh, no, that's good because I'd actually bought some thermal clothing. So the hat went quite well. I don't wear it in bed though.
But yeah, there's a Facebook page. There's a Facebook group to go
Yeah,
on, so you can keep up to date with all the upcoming speakers. But that's the Free Thinking Society.
yeah. Well, I'll link everything in the show notes. And you've been a fantastic guest, and
Cheers,
thanks
Mark.
for coming on. I know time constraints and all that, and family life, but I really appreciate it. It's sort of after putting the presentation on that little clip when we caught up at your group,
Yes, yeah.
sort of finishes it off that I've got you on for an interview.
Great. Yeah, I've
Yeah,
really enjoyed it.
yeah, brilliant. Anyway, Kieran, thanks a lot. We'll do it again sometime in the future
Yes,
when got a bit
Lo-
more time. Yeah,
loads more to talk about.
yeah, yeah, and keep us informed on your book and that when it comes out, and we'll plug that as well.
Okay,
Yeah,
will do.
you take care. All the
Cheers,
best,
Mark.
Kieran.
See
Yes,
ya.
all the
Bye.
best. Bye,
Bye.
bye.